Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Santos, Councillor Williams, Councillor Willens, and Councillor Singh. Today is sort of a part two of the Heritage Heights in regarding the land use concept. So I'm going to turn it over to, I'm just checking to see if the live stream is running, and I believe it is. Rohan, I just saw your message. And I'm going to turn it over to, I think it's Bob to do some introductory remarks, or to Andrew.
Yes, but Bob will be kicking off.
Okay. So Bob, if you wish to start, please go ahead. So Bob, I can see that you've put your microphone on. Can you hear? But I can't hear you. Just a moment. So Bob, can you confirm that you can hear us? And I unfortunately cannot hear you. I don't know if the other members can hear you. Okay, you're saying audio issues. So members of council, excuse me, if you just want to bear with us just for a moment. Andrew, do you wish to go ahead and start while we're
resolving?
Yes. Okay.
Sure. Why don't I start? And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, members of council, for joining us this morning. Further to our last workshop back with you in May, there had been a request for us to come forward and share with you the results of our last workshop, particularly around land uses. So that is the objective for today. We wanted to share the plan with you for an opportunity for discussion prior to us bringing this forward to Planning Committee in July. On the line today to present is Bob Yerke, Director of Policy Planning, myself, Andrew McNeil. I'm a strategic leader with the Policy Planning Division, Anand Ballram, who is a Senior Policy Planner, Ian Lockwood, a livable transportation engineer with Tool Design, and Andrea Ostradka, who is a transit practice lead with Tool Design. What we wanted to do today, Bob can provide some introductory remarks when we get the audio issues resolved. We wanted to recap what took place during our May workshop. We wanted to share with you the land use assumptions, the concepts that have come out of that workshop, and then walk you through an outline of next steps that will unfold over the coming weeks and months, and most importantly, provide an opportunity for all of you to ask questions and for us to do our best to provide answers to you. A bit of background, Brampton, particularly this area, Heritage Heights, Northwest Brampton, has one of the longest running interim control bylaws in the province, approximately 17 years. This has been in place to protect lands for the GTA West corridor planning. Sorry, is that Bob? Is that you? No. Okay. Between 2006, 2016, there was a moratorium on development to protect for shale resources. That has now been lifted, and there is currently an appeal between the province and the region to resolve the shale protection policies. Those discussions are taking place as we speak, and we're hoping that issue can come to resolution fairly soon, so that we can lift one of the major impediments to unlocking development in Northwest Brampton. As you are all well aware, between 2017 and 2018, there was a new vision created for Brampton 2040 vision. And one of the key areas that it looked at was Heritage Heights as a potential town center. And we have really looked at that vision to inform a lot of the direction and develop the concept plan. The technically preferred route for the GTA West corridor was unveiled back in September of 2019. We are hearing that there should be a further refinement of that corridor any day now. We were told June or July of this year. And in parallel to that, the GTA West corridor transmission corridor is being planned. It's being planned in lockstep with the highway. There are also a lot of other studies going on, such as housing, community hubs, complete streets, SERP. All of that will be layered on a lot of the work and the thinking that we are currently undertaking for Heritage Heights. Just a quick recap. We have now completed 3 charrettes for the planning of Heritage Heights. Back in November of 2019, we brought together relevant stakeholders to work in a collaborative way to create the high-level vision for Heritage Heights. We refined that vision into a new draft structure back in February. And then throughout May, we undertook a virtual charrette where we layered on land uses, urban design, refined transportation, open space, parks, schools, to create a concept plan that we will share with you today. The concept plan that we are going to share with you is a fundamental shift in approach. Previous thinking around Heritage Heights was really being dominated by the car. A major highway, large buffers, limited access interchanges that really would divide this community, big wide roads, etc. These are all symptoms of suburban sprawl. What we have created is a plan that shifts the focus, and this new focus is around people, putting people first, walkability, developing cycling infrastructure right out of the gate so that it's planned into this community and that it's not a retrofit 20 years down the line. So this will be probably the most walkable, cycling friendly area in all of Brampton. Transit is now front and center in this community. Livable streets that are slower and safer. What this is really about is creating a complete community where one can live, work, learn, and play at all stages throughout their life and enjoy a high quality of life while doing so. I mentioned transit is key. It's a central ordering principle of this plan with a GO station, 2 BRT stations. And the key thing is we've created a framework that not only reinforces walkability, cycling, and transit, but it's flexible to allow the city, this area of the city, to evolve in a more sustainable way moving forward. A lot of the suburbs, conventional subdivisions with winding streets, cul-de-sacs, those areas are very difficult to change. And I'm talking about the long term and second, third, fourth generation of growth in municipalities. We think we've created a structure that will stand the test of time and age quite well for the city of Brampton. I mentioned this was our workshop agenda for our May workshop. Week 1 was about open space. Week 2 was about refining the transportation network. Week 3 was developing land use, density assumptions. And then the 4th week was bringing this all together. We had initially planned to present the final week of June. We pushed for a couple more days. There was such great interaction and collaboration going on with landowners. We wanted to provide a bit more time for that interaction to occur. I want to stress that today, the plan is not complete. This is a snapshot in time. We will continue to undergo iterative changes to the plan as the technical studies progress and as we progress some of our discussions with stakeholders. So please, I want to emphasize that the plan is not complete yet, but the key thing is we want to bring this forward to council soon so that we can progress and advance a number of parallel discussions that are quite important. These would be with our neighbors. We want to sit down with the town of Caledon, Halton Hills, City of Vaughan, City of Mississauga. We want to share the assumptions in this plan and get their feedback on it. Critically important is to advancing discussions with the province around the GTS corridor, transmission corridor. What you will see today, the density assumptions are challenging a lot of what had been thought could occur out in Heritage Heights for many, many years now. So we need to work through those numbers and assumptions with the region of Peel, with school boards. The density assumptions that will be seeing are significantly higher than anything that had been thought for Heritage Heights. We believe this is a very good thing, and it is a more sustainable approach for the city of Brampton that will result in more tax base, more revenue coming to the municipality. So financially, it's more sustainable. But we want to be intelligent about working through the implications of that density with all of our partners. I'm ready to turn it over to Ian and Andrea. Bob, at this point, have you got your audio resolved? And then did you want to jump in for a couple minutes? If not, we'll just we'll jump in with Ian Lockwood.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. So no, thank you, Andrew, for jumping in. I think you did a great job there, and happy to jump in. I think when we get to the questions, and looking forward to Ian going through, and like to have everybody's participation on this. It's a really important milestone for us here. So anyway, I'll turn it back over to you, Andrew, and Ian to go through the details of the outcomes.
Okay, now Peter, I noticed Ian is muted. Can we unmute him?
Yes, he should be able to unmute himself. And I see that he's unmuted right now. Okay. There, Ian, can you go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. I thought I'd have to pantomime it. Well, thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everybody. Mayor, councillors, thank you for attending this important presentation. So I will be going over some principles that went into the planning and design of Heritage Heights. The first thing we looked at was the layer of open space, neighborhoods, parks, schools, and we went through a lot of theory about how to design walkable neighborhoods. We then looked at all the ecological maps and figured out where the open spaces needed to be preserved and making connections. We also talked about how to create value for the community by orienting the development properly to the open spaces so that they're contributing to the quality of life. And next slide. And then we took a hard look at a lot of transportation aspects of Heritage Heights. And the one that Andrew mentioned earlier was about the proposed highway. And if you look at the top right, the highway comes with a lot of baggage. Highways don't generally create value for the locations where they are located. They create value for places far away. And if this highway were to go through Heritage Heights, it would create a swath of low value property along the highway corridor, radiating out a couple hundred meters in each direction. It will also concentrate a lot of traffic, well, all the traffic actually on Mayfield and BOULEVARD, lowering the quality of life and safety along those streets. And the reason for the highway is for economic development. And a boulevard would actually result in far more jobs and economic development than the highway. We think of these highways in cities as kind of the blockbusters of infrastructure. It's kind of an old idea which has not really done all that well for cities. It creates a big barrier and a loss in value for anybody on the wrong side of the highway. So we'd like to instead propose something that's much more city friendly, not just for Brampton, but places north as well. And that's a multi-lane boulevard. And that would actually attract value instead of repel value. We also talked about connected network of streets, creating great relationships and scale and walkability, which is really important for the long-term health and energy footprint and so forth of the community. Let's go to the next slide. So here's a contrast between boulevards and highways. The boulevard moves a lot of traffic. You can actually see some trucks on the Champs-Élysées there, but the edges are really nice. So you can have thriving businesses and walkability, homes, offices. A highway kind of sanitizes everything on the sides, and you can only access them periodically. One is multimodal, the other one is completely car-oriented. One is much safer than the other. So we're dealing right now with a declared climate emergency and health emergency in Brampton. And this is something that the leadership can do something about. We can do something that still creates a vibrant economy while dealing with both the health and climate change issues. Next slide. So this is an idea for the boulevard. It has a transit service down the middle. It's got dedicated truck lanes, car lanes each way to meet the kind of the long distance kind of regional needs. And then also you have access lanes on each side to provide local access to the businesses, parking and so forth. And then you've got separated bike facilities. So this is actually a highly bikeable corridor and nice wide sidewalks. And all the sidewalks that we're doing are designed to allow for social distancing so that this part of Brampton will be highly resilient to not just climate change, but also for health emergencies. Next slide. This is what the edge is proposed to look like. It's, again, very walkable, bikeable, accessible, so that the boulevard is a seam that connects this part of Brampton together as opposed to dividing it. So we think this will be one of the best addresses in town instead of one of the worst, which would occur with the highway. Next slide. So these are the criteria that were used for the highway planning. And if you compare the highways criteria with the same criteria for Boulevard, the Boulevard completely outperforms the highway, but it wasn't considered as an environmental option. And it really ought to be, because from a natural environment perspective, it's not even close. From a habitat perspective, surface water, and so on, the Boulevard is far more flexible and environmentally superior. From a socioeconomic and cultural environment, there's not one aspect that the highway does better. The Boulevard outperforms it in everything, from sprawl to jobs to climate change to property values to right-of-way needs. It's literally almost 70 meters smaller than the highway. There's no barrier effect. There's actually a seam. Noise, air quality, public health, everything's better with the highway. And then with implementation, the costs are less. It can be staged. There's funding mechanisms to make it happen. The highway is unfunded and will suppress not just development, but good quality development in this area for a long time. Now, from a transportation perspective, the Boulevard outperforms the highway in most categories, except for a couple. One is the highway can carry more volume. However, from the number of trips being made, which is a surrogate for economic activity, jobs, and so forth, the Boulevard will actually outperform the highway. Highways tend to encourage the least sustainable trips, the long commutes, these sorts of things, and the Boulevard changes the types of land use outcomes we'll have and make a much more sustainable land use pattern where trips will be more sustainable and shorter. Also, some folks will think that the higher speeds on the highway are better than the lower and safer speeds on the boulevard. But again, that encourages unsustainable outcomes like sprawl and long distance commuting, and the boulevard will encourage a better jobs housing mix. Next slide. And then I'm going to pass the mic on to Andrea for a moment, and she'll talk about some of the land use principles that were built into the plan.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. As we started to think about land use in Heritage Heights, we talked again about principles and theory of development centered around people. And so one of the things that we talked about was how important it is that like faces like. So if we've got high density on one side of the street, we want high density on the other side of the street, medium density and low density, consistent with that. All of uses can be across from open space or a park, but we really want to think carefully about densities and block structure. As we get into block structure, it's important that transitions from low to high or high to low happen at mid-block. That's a more natural place for those transitions to happen. It creates a very comfortable and flexible urban design pattern. We wanted to create a community in which residents and workers and business owners could meet most of their daily or weekly needs within the community. There's still so much to offer within Brampton, the city of Brampton, and the larger regional area, but a really functioning community like Heritage Heights, we wanted to make sure that local businesses and uses could meet daily and weekly needs. The bottom image on your screen shows the transect. This just shows the general idea on how we transition from rural to urban. So rural, of course, is on the right and urban is on the left. For Heritage Heights, we're really more on the left side of the screen. So we're thinking of higher density development, but we did create the plan based on a foundation of open space and conservation areas, which Ian touched on. Can you go to the next slide, please? So you can see that there's just been an evolution in the thinking. If you start on the bottom left, first we were thinking about a highway, which led us to consider the local roadway network in a series of 4 and 6 lane higher speed roads. That led to a land use plan that was based on high speed roads and highways. As we began to think about what other options we had and how we could create a community based on people and based on sustainability for Brampton in the future, we started to think a little bit differently. We went through an iterative process with lots of involvement from various landowners, from developers, from different local governments and agencies, and representatives of different interests to come up with some ideas that eventually led us, if you kind of loop around the top there and you see all of those different ideas, led us to the master plan that the concept that we have, that we're going to be presenting today. Next slide. So this is where we left off. I'm going to pass it back to Ian.
So, oh, hang on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the plan is centered around 3 transit stations, one in the middle where the GO train goes, and you have the bus services going north-south. North is to the left, by the way, and so there's 3 main bus stations and along the boulevard, and this helps shape the land uses tremendously. Next slide. So this was the plan, and it looks quite complicated, but I'll help break it down so that you can see kind of the DNA of the idea. Next. So this is kind of an X-ray of the north-south streets with north to the left and south to the right. And we're quite challenged in terms of north-south connectivity because of the environmental lands to the south. We really only have two connections. We've got Mississauga Road and we've got Heritage Road. And so what we're trying to do is create an effective north-south network. And so, for example, Williams Parkway, which you can see in the top right, bends around. It doesn't have much of a future going further west because of the environmental land. So we bent it to the north to create more north-south network. We split Heritage Road up into two to create north-south network towards the western side of the plan. Next slide. And these are the larger streets coming from the east, and we're trying to connect them as far west as we can. So there's 5 of them, and Wanless Road we bent to the north because otherwise it would hit Churchill, which is a really tiny little street. So it bends up to Mayfield Road to create some east-west connectivity. Next. And these are some of the kind of east-west support streets. And what we're trying to do is create a kind of a 2-lane town, if you will, so that we can keep the scale such that people are comfortable walking, people are comfortable crossing the street, people are comfortable riding their bicycles. So that's the east-west network. Next slide. So if you combine them together, we have a really nice network of north, south, and east-west, what we call framework streets. Now, there's lots of little streets within all of these blocks, but those are the main routes that get you places. Next slide. And of course, there's the boulevard, which helps with more kind of regionally oriented trips, as well as streets like Mississauga Road. Next slide. And then there's a series of sort of fill-in streets which allow for greater connectivity, access to parking and back-of-house type activities. So that's the network. There are 3 existing crossings over the railway tracks, Churchill, Heritage, and Mississauga Road. Next slide. We're proposing 2 new crossings, one to the west and one to the east of the boulevard. And these are important to allow for staging. We don't know exactly how this is going to get staged. We're suspecting it'll start from the south and work north, but however it gets staged, this gives us some flexibility. Next. And then there's 3 crossings close together, one at each end of the transit station and one for the boulevard. And this is kind of a package deal which helps the boulevard provide its mainline functions and also access to what we call the B streets that parallel the boulevard, which provide access to things like parking garages and services and kind of back house deliveries and all that kind of thing. Next slide. So that's the framework plan, and then in those blocks you would fill in with all the non-framework streets, all the smaller streets. Next slide. So the idea is that if we were to achieve this network, then we would get much more friendly, walkable, comfortable, accessible, engaging urban human scale outcomes like you have on the right instead of what you have on the left, with this, which is much more automobile oriented, less walkable and so forth. And we're trying to create a really desirable image and value for this community. Next slide. And that applies to the little streets and as well as the biggest street in Heritage Heights, which would be the boulevard. So every street in Heritage Heights will be friendly for people on foot and bike, and the streets that have transit and for transit. Next slide. So I'm going to pass the microphone back to Andrea.
Thanks, Ian. There's really a tremendous opportunity to leverage the investments the city and the region have already made in transit. This image shows roughly in the middle where the boulevard and the GO line intersect, and this is really where we started to focus our concepts for development. You go to the next slide. if we put a GO station here in the middle, this creates an opportunity for some higher density, higher intensity mixed use development. We know that there is a need for a hospital or other healthcare and wellness uses. It makes sense for those to go near the GO station because it's a high intensity employer. We also know, because we have had several conversations with representatives of in the industry, that there are some uses that are more sensitive the closer you get to a rail station. So we believe that with the size of the site that we've roughly planned here for a hospital or for other associated wellness uses, that there's room enough to organize and plan for a facility to both grow and to put certain uses in places that are less sensitive to anything like vibrations, for example. This also creates the opportunity for more intense mixed use office or retail or other employment uses. If you go to the next slide. Including a main street. So the red lines on the screen here show where we envision a local main street. So this would be likely retail, shopping, restaurant, other service uses like a salon, for example, would happen here with a public gathering square in the middle. Next slide. And then we see more intense development, like I mentioned, that office and other commercial mixed use around both the GO station and two other transit stations at the north end and the south end of our study area along the boulevard. We also have mixed use development cited at BOULEVARD and at Doubles Drive. I should say that the streets that that don't exist today have in our plan a tennis theme. Those aren't the real names of the streets, but it gives us something to refer to as we go through the plan. If you go to the next slide. Then we start to see beyond the highest density, which you see in the kind of darkest orange, we start to see medium density, which would also be mixed use, but more residential in nature. And then next slide, it eventually transitions into lower density residential uses. Because this is a community in which we envision all daily and weekly needs being met, we also have thought about schools and parks and stormwater needs. If you go to the next slide, you start to see those populating. On the north side of the site, we have what we've called light industrial employment uses. So here, on the north side or the left side of your screen, we've designated this area as the kind of employment uses that would be clean, they would be quiet, but they would probably be lower density, sort of single or double story type of facilities. If you go to the next slide. There are schools throughout this community, both primary and secondary schools. We've had a number of conversations with school board representatives throughout this project, and at this point, this concept plan reflects the best information we have, but we do believe that additional conversations about school locations and numbers will have to go on even after this point. So you see the schools in blue, and then you see some regional parks in green and other more local parks in pink. I know it's a little bit unusual to see pink parks, but we wanted to make sure that those started to jump out on the slide and everybody could pick those out. And then if you go to the next slide, all of this, of course, is based on the foundation of conservation lands, of wildlife connections, and of open space needs within the community. If you go to the next slide. And so this is what the master plan starts to look like when you put all of that together. The GO station, of course, is in the middle. 2 transit stations, one to the north, one to the south along the boulevard. Those 3 transit stations are where we see the highest density development, and medium and low density moving out from there. A mix of uses supporting schools, parks, and other civic facilities will be important, as well as nodes of commercial opportunity such that you see at Wanless Drive, Sandalwood Parkway, BOULEVARD, Williams Parkway, for example, and then that light industrial use along the northern part of the study area. If you go to the next slide, this starts to show how this community will come together and what's accessible. So the small circles around each of the transit stations is about a 5-minute walk. It's 400 meters. And then the larger circle is about a 10-minute walk, or 800 meters. And then if you go to the next slide, the red circles show a 5-minute bike ride. So basically, you can get anywhere that you want to go within this community from one of these transit stations within a 5-minute bike ride, or you can get pretty far within a 10-minute walk as well. And that's where the most intense and dense development will happen, around those transit stations and within that 10-minute walk or very quick bike ride of the transit facilities. Go to the next slide. As we translate that into the numbers, this is where we get to what Andrew was mentioning about some new thoughts about density and intensity. So this chart shows what we believe that the potential for Heritage Heights has overall. This is for the entire community. If we're looking at high density mixed use development around each of those transit stations with 125 to 250 housing units per hectare, as well as mixed use employment uses, you start to get much higher residential uses and workers per hectare than we've seen in some previous plans. Of course, that translates into the medium and low density as well. Overall, what we believe the potential is for Heritage Heights is between about 95,000 and 209,000 people. That means between 26,000 and about 58,000 housing units. And these are a mix of housing units. They can be single family attached housing, high density apartments or condos, accessory dwelling units, etc. But we start to see a lot. And then the employment could range between 33,000 and 91,000 jobs. And so if you go to the next slide, we start to break that down. So if you, then if you go to the next slide, we start to break that down by those high density nodes around the transit areas specifically. The first part of this chart shows the north transit area. The middle part of the chart shows the GO station. And the bottom part of the chart shows the south transit station. And these are all calculations based on the master plan that we're presenting today of what we believe the potential ranges are for housing development, what that translates into population, and how that translates into employment. These numbers, of course, depend upon various decisions that are made over time and how the market evolves over time. But, you know, Brampton is a really special place. And I think because it has so much to offer, people are really flocking to Brampton. The growth rate of the city is higher than most other places in Canada. The average number of people per household is higher than most other places in Canada. And so we've got to think sustainably and long-term about how to accommodate growth. And I think that Heritage Heights is a wonderful opportunity to do that in a way that will support the city, but also meet the needs that the families that live in Brampton and are coming to Brampton, are attracted to the opportunities in Brampton have. So if you go to the next slide, this chart shows in particular what the development is outside of that 800-meter walk from the transit stations. And it's still, even though we were concentrating employment and housing density and intensity around the transit stations, there's still a tremendous opportunity for development outside of that 800-meter walk. And you can see that the low density, primarily dwelling units, range between almost 8,000 and 20,000. And then the population outside of the transit station areas is between about 45,000 and 108,000 people. So there's just, we wanted to create a place that had a mix of opportunity that was flexible to react to market conditions as they evolve over the next few years. But the kind of urban form that we want to see lends itself to some much higher densities than we had been thinking about previously. So if you go to the next slide, this shows simply the concept for the different land use categories. So in the high density areas around the transit stations, we see these as being multifamily attached housing. It would be medium rise or high rise apartment buildings. There would also be office, retail, commercial, could be institutional or educational uses. In the medium density areas, these are also multifamily attached housing, but could be in addition to apartments or condos, things like townhomes, row homes, walk-ups. In the low density, it could be single or multifamily detached or attached housing. What we call the wellness district could be where the hospital or other healthcare type uses go. Along the main street, this is ground floor retail or commercial with residential above, wide sidewalks, active street life, could be street parking as well as structured parking. We talked about the light industrial being employment centers that are large buildings, either single or double story with surface parking, clean, quiet uses. Then those convenience commercial nodes are more, probably would take the character of more strip commercial, but has single buildings that can be divided into multiple uses without parcels and surface parking. If you go to the next slide, these just show some images of what these places could look like. So in the highest density areas around the transit stations, if you think about other local developments like Bishop's Landing in Halifax, for example, or Oliver Village in Edmonton, this is the kind of density and intensity that might fit into these categories. Go to the next slide. In the medium density residential area, something like Salisbury Heights in Vancouver is similar to these densities. The looks and the feel of the buildings can take different forms and architectural character, but it does support these densities. And then the next slide low-density residential development. It can be both attached or detached. There would be street parking. There could be some low-rise apartments. The next slide shows the Main Street. This is a place that we see as being the heart of the community, where there's lots of different uses that could be accommodated, but it's really a place where we see more retail and service type uses and places where people gather. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Ian to talk about the next steps that we took.
Thank you, Andrea. So the purpose of cities is to maximize social and economic exchange, is to bring people together for exchange. And so proximity has always been important in cities. Unfortunately, post-World War II, we tried to ignore proximity by speeding things up through highways and fast roads. And so we could overcome proximity by just speeding around. And that has had health outcomes and environmental outcomes and forum outcomes, which are all generally negative. And so we've been doing everything we can to reward proximity, so it's easier to walk and bike and use transit. So this community will be particularly healthy and sustainable because of that. So I'll talk a little bit about proximity of certain land uses. Next slide. So public schools, they are shown in the blue, and I'm just going to do a little X-ray of them. I'm going to first add the bike facilities. Next slide. So these are separated bike facilities, and they basically follow the framework streets. And if we just X-ray out the bicycle facilities in the schools, you can see that every school is very accessible for cycling. So parents will be much more comfortable letting their kids either walk or ride their bikes to school. And as Andrea pointed out earlier, everything within this whole community is highly walkable and bikeable. Next slide. And so those are the 5-minute walks around the schools. And so you can see we've got really good coverage around the schools. And if the densities go up, there'll be more schools, so there'll be even more coverage, and so it'll be shorter walks. Next slide. And so the parks, so those little pink parks, and we'll do the same thing in terms of proximity to the parks. So let's look at the parks. So those are the it's like a 3-minute walk to the park or a 5-minute walk to the park, and you can see highly accessible parks. And you'll see the red's a little more intense on the higher density areas, and that's on purpose because obviously more people will be living there. Next slide. And now there's some exceptions. So this is pretty pure plan in terms of following best practices, but there are a couple of exceptions. Next slide. So we put the Catholic schools on the edges because they do mostly busing. However, these schools will probably move because the Catholic School Board prefers a more interior location for their schools, so they will probably move. But at the moment, in this snapshot, there was an exception. There's some remote employment areas. There's a low-density employment area along Mayfield Road towards the north, and to the far south east corner, there's a higher density node. Next slide. And then along Mississauga Road, there is transit there, so we have a strip of medium density housing, plus there's a series of convenience kind of development along that street as well. Next. Those are those convenience and mixed use nodes that I just mentioned. Next. And then finally, along sort of the halfway between the existing transit station and the proposed transit station, we have more density on BOULEVARD Drive because that is equidistance between two transit stations. So those are the exceptions, but for the most part, everything is within an easy walk of the 3 transit stations or an easy bike ride. Next slide. So now I'm going to pass the microphone on to Andrew to finish up. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of next steps, what we are planning to do is bring forward a report to July 27th Planning Committee. At that time, we're hoping to get endorsement of the concept and vision for Heritage Heights. And as I mentioned earlier, that this is important so that we can start to advance those parallel discussions with our neighboring municipalities, most importantly with the province around the GTA West corridor and their transmission corridor planning. And then we'll also want to be refining some of the other technical studies. But we're hoping that the council is supportive of the direction, recognizing that there will be iterative changes to follow. Immediately thereafter, we would recommence a number of technical studies, such as the subwatershed study, the transportation master plan, etc. And those will provide some iterative feedback that will further evolve the plan. The population and employment numbers that Andrea walked you through, I mentioned earlier, they are significantly higher, an order of magnitude higher than what had been thought of Heritage Heights. So we need to work with the region, with landowners, with the school boards to finalize those numbers, because they do impact a lot of planning work that goes on within the region and within the city of Brampton. So that's important to finalize those numbers. And then most importantly, the plan is not set today. It won't be set on July 27th. We want to keep this iterative collaborative process moving forward between now and the end of the year. As we've mentioned many times, our goal is to get the secondary plan prepared by the end of the year, but there will be some iterative changes between now and that time. With that, I think we are ready to open it up to questions. And Bob, did you want to facilitate the Q&A?
Sure. I think if my mic is working now, thank you, Andrew, and Ian, Andrea, and Anand for pulling this together, along with all the contributions from the landowners and stakeholders, other consultants. It's been, I think, a really good iterative process to this point. As Andrew says, there's certainly opportunity as we get more information to continue to refine the framework we have. But this is a really important milestone, and really does allow for that next step to be taken. And happy to hear from you, councillors, in terms of any questions you might have, where we are now and some of the directions we're going to see coming forward in the next couple of months. So I see Councillor Vincente and Santos and Singh. So if that's the right order, then Councillor Vincente.
Thank you, Bob. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. So I just want to say what I have said in the past is that I totally love this concept. I see it. I can imagine it being built, and having been in other parts where I have seen something along the lines of a highway that slices through, but the edges have been softened, if I can put it that way. I see the benefits of somehow finding ways to integrate the road so that it doesn't create that hard divide. I love the idea of the corridor with medium and high density and mixed uses. I think that creates another front for us as a city to build interesting places where people will want to live, work, and play. And so all of that is great. But when I look at this, and thank you for putting this slide up on the page, when I look at this slide here, notwithstanding what was said earlier in the presentation, that you're expecting anywhere from 30,000 to 90,000 jobs coming or existing within this space in the future, I look at this diagram, and when I see the potential for jobs along that corridor in terms of mixed use and office, and the section along the north end, which is on the left side of the screen, which is, I guess, for commercial or industrial uses, I see a lot of yellow. which represents what I will just simply call low density residential. And so what I see here is something that's missing. I see a section of this overall plan which may need to reserve or set aside land for large employers, companies that want a physical presence that allows them to run their business, and I see that absent here. And so when I see the number of 30 to 90,000, I wonder how we would achieve that with the division and the uses that we have planned here today. I know in previous workshops, staff have indicated that this is very flexible plan. Well, if it is flexible and we have the opportunity now to craft a plan, my preference would be for a section, and I think it would make sense just on the dividing lines that are created by the highway itself, the green space, which would be waterways. I think that we should really be bold and make sure that we reserve that northwest end for more employment uses, because as we've said before, with the city of Brampton having more than 60% of its population having to go elsewhere to work, and in the 2040 vision, we have stated that we want to reverse that number from 60-40 to 40-60. I think that we need to make sure that we are setting aside enough land for those uses. And I think as part of council's approval, even for July, I don't know if that's possible. I would love to see some work done by our Economic Development Office to evaluate the numbers that are being proposed here and to find out what it is that we have to do to make sure that we can achieve those. So that's the summary of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So just by way of a quick response, and then maybe Andrew or Ian or Andrea can provide a little bit more. The concept here in terms of employment, what actually drives that employment number up is the extent of the mixed use development that's being proposed here. You know, that's typically these days where more of the uptake has been in most communities, especially in the GTA, is around those intensive mixed use areas where you've got that sort of live work opportunity. That's typically where a lot of the office users are going. Of course, given where we're at now with COVID and everything else, you know, really trying to figure out exactly what it is the response will be is a bit up in the air. But one of the things this approach allows us to do is be, as you'd said, quite flexible. But that concentration with a mix of uses really provides us that resilience to attract employers and also to provide for the other range of uses that people would typically be attracted to. So it's kind of that mix of uses rather than the standalone office parks is where we're typically seeing more employment and more office use happening and more economic development happening. But if others have other comments, we're certainly well aware this is a long-term plan, and sort of as the market shifts, it has that with this framework in place, you have the opportunity to respond to it. Andrew or Ian, Andrea, do you have further comments?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of comments. So further to Bob's remarks, the area in the middle, the mixed use zone, I think as we begin to craft the policy that would oversee those areas, I think looking at permitting standalone office employment uses is probably something that would land in the policy. In terms of larger floor plate standalone employment uses, that is the thought for the gray area up fronting along Mayfield, because we do recognize Mayfield does carry a significant amount of truck traffic today. So we thought that would make sense for that area. We will definitely work very closely with economic development over the next little while to develop the right strategy, a thoughtful strategy around employment and how to attract the right kinds of jobs out here. But we appreciate all your feedback, and we'll definitely take a look at that. The one thing we have been very deliberate about, though, is to move away from large truck warehousing distribution type center activity in this community. We recognize that's very important to the city of Brampton, but this is an area of the city that we wanted to try a different approach to employment. But we'll certainly definitely take a look at how we can incorporate some of your feedback. Anything further from Ian or Andrea?
I think I would just echo your comments in a slightly different way. I think the idea is to provide a bit more diversity in Brampton in terms of types of jobs and have that regional draw for employees coming down the two transit systems to this mixed use employment type places instead of being driving. So the gray area is clearly employment oriented, but I'd also say that the darker orange reddish areas are also going to provide a lot of employment, and so will the health district area. So there'll be plenty of employment along the boulevard. Thanks.
Thank you. So just as I guess a follow-up comment then, and we don't want to miss the opportunity here. If there is going to be an opportunity for a GO train stop along this CN corridor, where on this map would that stop likely go?
Councillor, if you look, the boulevard, yeah, perfect. The intersection of the boulevard and the rail line is where that stop roughly would go conceptually at this point. So
I've heard occasional reference to the idea of a Heritage Heights GO stop. As you understand, in conversations that staff may have had with Metrolinx, the stop would likely go in that location. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the location we've been exploring.
Bob, do you want me to share a bit about discussions with Metrolinx?
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah, so we've had a number of discussions. Now, these have been in the form of informal stakeholder engagement. We wanted to make sure that we were doing things properly and setting the stage for a successful outcome with Metrolinx. So key things they're looking for: minimum separation distance of 1.5 kilometers from Mount Pleasant. We meet that threshold. The other thing, they're looking to do GO stations quite differently from the past. They're no longer thinking about end of the line park and ride with big structures. They want them in highly dense urban places so that there's a lot of walk-up traffic. If you can land a significant employer like a hospital in close proximity as well, your business case becomes that much stronger. So the key thing here for Metrolinx is we need to demonstrate there's enough density, enough riders to make it worthwhile for them to stop their train and allow people to get on and off. I think by our preliminary numbers, we're well on that right track. And following council endorsement of the plan, assuming that you endorse it, then one of the things we would look to do is engage Metrolinx in that whole business planning exercise. But what they have said to us is well on our way. We're doing everything right.
Great. And I know that in another call we had some conversations, or it was stated that as a buffer between some of the residential areas colored in here in yellow and that CN corridor, that could be additional opportunity for office and commercial uses, right? And that would be very walkable to that GO station where you have indicated it would potentially go. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Santos.
Thanks so much, everyone. And every time I see these renderings and pictures, it makes me very excited and jealous of Councillor Paleshi and Willens, where this is their ward. That's where it's going to be. So I'm happy that it's coming to the city. Now, would you mind going to that last slide with that beautiful rendering where it says questions? Or yeah, there we go. Beautiful. That is fantastic. And I'm glad, I believe it was Ian or Andrew mentioned planning for a resilient, a more resilient area, that it keeps in mind social distancing, etc. But the resiliency also is about seasonal conditions. And so this looks beautiful in the summer. What will it look like in the winter? And I know I've mentioned this before about in the last workshop about heated paths, heated cycling trails, and for pedestrians. But I'm also, like to Councillor Vicente's point, and you addressed it a little bit in your response, it's also about how close these people are going to be living to their place of work, so that it is easier to commute during the winter season, or when it is cold outside, or if it's raining, it's not that long of a walk, or it's not that wet of a walk to work or to wherever it is that they need to go in the area. So if you could respond to that, because I think that's also important to the planning process for Heritage Heights and any policy moving forward as we continue to plan with more active transportation. We do have to think about all seasonal conditions because that's going to look a lot different in the winter than in the summer. The other, so one thing that I wanted to share is, were there any thoughts about sort of underground pathways that connect underground, similar to what downtown Toronto has? I believe that Mississauga has some underground pathways as well, but just something for us to consider what that underground infrastructure will look like, especially if there's higher density along the boulevard and if there's going to be underground parking. I may be going into like the next phase of planning, but just some things to keep in mind. And then the final thing, as I was writing down these points about being more proactive in the tools and the planning that goes forward to support this new way of development, is around speed enforcement. And I'm sorry if speed enforcement is a sensitive, it's a very sensitive topic for us in Brampton right now, given what happened last week. But is there an opportunity for us on the boulevard or other areas where we know that speeding will occur? Is there ways for us to incorporate that technology and cameras, et cetera, proactively before those roads are even built? So we're already thinking about speed enforcement in the planning process and integrating it. And then the only other thing I will bring up is, because we're dealing with this in Ward 1, is around the 5G network and technology around cell phone towers and where those currently ugly things will be placed to support this particular community. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I'll just touch on a few of those, and I think we'll offer up a few other comments from Ian and Andrew certainly before. So what I'd say around the sort of some of the last ones first, in terms of the speeding and the opportunity for integrating cell phone towers and other amenities. You know, planning for that from the outset helps, and one of the key components in terms of actual behavior for traffic speeds is the design of the streets and the signals you're getting. You know, so there will always be opportunity to include other enforcement, but that should really be your last stop. If the design of the streets to begin with should be what's giving the cues for people to drive at the appropriate speed and to make sure that they're aware of you got safe integration of the other modes of transportation. And that's from the outset one of the considerations for this component of the boulevard that you can see here in the rendering. That also plays into the opportunity for easily controlling some of the snow in the winter. I know there's a tendency in a lot of Canadian cities to focus on the summer, and you don't see as many winter pictures. But absolutely, Brampton's a winter city as well. And, providing for those short trips, well protected, that people can get from one place to another, appropriate. You can look at, as you said, some heating of the streets, again, a little further down the road. But we're certainly incorporating the community and energy emissions reduction plan direction, the look at district energy, the sustainability aspects, and then ways of incorporating some of the amenities in the urban community hubs work that we're also doing to look at where we can integrate those uses together. But maybe Ian, did you want to talk a little bit about the street design and in terms of speed?
Actually, can I jump in, Ian, just before you? Because I know Ian will have a bunch of things to add. I just wanted to comment on a few things, and these were all excellent points. Number one, the best transportation plan is always a land use plan. And we've been very deliberate about creating a compact mixed use place. The goal is to maximize short trips on foot, on bicycle. That helps alleviate a lot of traffic. But in doing so, you raise an excellent point about the four seasons in Canada. This can be done quite effectively in our climate. Winter maintenance is important, and that may be something that we have to look at doing a little bit beyond what we've done in the past in this type of place. I'll share a personal story. I'm one of those rare cyclists that commutes to work in Brampton. For many years, I cycled from my home in Mississauga to Toronto all year round. And what that required was winter maintenance, clearing of cycling trails, clearing of streets for cyclists. So again, that's probably new for Brampton, but it can certainly be done. Our neighbors are already doing that. It's just an additional level of service. But we can think about things like canopies, heated streets to make it more comfortable. You mentioned underground pathways, and Toronto is quite unique with the path system. It's actually unique in the world. As a principle, I would strongly recommend not doing that here. And the reason for that is wherever possible, you want to get people up and walking on your streets to add to vibrancy. There certainly could be an opportunity to link and connect some underground parking garages in the event that there's a horrible storm that people really don't want to go outside. But as a principle, I think we really want to encourage people to walk along streets. Those are just some initial concepts. And I will also let you know, we are working and talking with the folks leading the energy planning. So things like heated sidewalks, heated trails, the technology exists. It's being done in other communities around the world. So we'll look at how to integrate some of that into this planning. Sorry, Ian, I jumped in. I just wanted to share some of that.
Yeah, good points. Can you put it on slide 28? It has the same view, but without the blue bar. So first of all, accounting for all the different seasons is really important. And so one of the things we think about is the snow removal. And if you look at that frontage lane, except around the planters, there's no vertical curbs. And so we would have to organize this around snow removal, but it's a lot easier to remove the snow without all the vertical curves. Now, the vertical curves in this case is just to stop people driving through the landscape, but this will be a whole lot easier to clean than a conventional street with conventional curbs. The other thing about this street, it has what we call valley gutters. You can see those ribbons of concrete running down each side of the frontage lane, and that's where the catch basins would be. So in wintertime, it's much more easy to keep them unplugged. In the spring, they don't get clogged up. In the fall, it's easier to pick up the leaves because the leaves migrate towards the valley gutters instead of getting caught in the corners like in a conventional street. So this street will be easier to clean in all seasons and easier to plow. You can't really talk about that without talking about other environmental ideas like permeability. So you can see the little flumes in the planters. Those go into rain gardens to help reduce the storm runoff that would have to go into some kind of underground sewer system. Protecting people from the climate, wind tunnels, snow, rain, and so forth is key. we could have an awning policy along the street so that in rain events people could walk easily. We have the trees, so when it's hot, there's a lot of shade. Now, notice they're all deciduous trees, so that in the summertime you have the shade benefit, in the wintertime you have the sun benefit. I would agree with Andrew about the tunnels. If you were to do tunnels, I would probably limit them for things like the district energy piping, for maybe mail delivery, that kind of thing. But it's probably best to keep people active and outside in general. The the speed enforcement part is very important. The whole reason we structured the place with those east, west, north, south streets is to get a 2-lane town, as I described it. The moment, and you all probably realize this when you just walk around Brampton, the moment you go onto one of these 4-lane or 6-lane roads, the hostility increases dramatically. The comfort level for pedestrians and cyclists goes down. They're not comfortable for transit use. And so what we're trying to do is to create that human scale. So instead of having just a few multi-lane streets, have more 2-lane streets, because they're much easier to navigate, and parents will license their children to walk and bike to school at a much younger age if the streets are comfortable and safer. And you don't have that weaving and overtaking that happens on multiple lane streets. And it only takes a few idiots to be driving recklessly to spoil the environment along a street. So 2-lane streets are way better. And so that's why we're emphasizing those. The other thing that we're trying to do is use lane widths to help reduce speeding, the right material choices. We're very serious about tree planting, not just for heat island effects, but for that sense of enclosure along streets so that drivers willingly slow down. And if you go to the previous slide, you can see the difference between a conventionally designed street and a nicely designed street. And there's no incentive to go slowly on the left streets, but there's no reason to speed on the right, and you feel out of place. And I've driven in both these types of communities, and the design of the street makes a big difference. Just posting up signs and having police out is not as effective as actually designing streets that what we call self-enforce the speeds that we want. And we do a lot of separated bike facility design around North America, and we've written several winter maintenance guides, and we'd be happy to help you with your winter maintenance. And so places like Chicago, for example, we did their bike plan and the University of Chicago's bike plan, and they maintain their paths nicely and all winter. And a lot of people ride their bikes now because the paths are so well maintained. You just have to dress more or less like you're going skiing. So that's not very difficult to do in Canada. So I think that's, oh yeah, and the block structure. One thing that we've focused on is orienting the blocks properly so that folks can get to trails easily. And we have a block structure that allows for direct routing. So as a pedestrian or as a cyclist, you don't have to go way out of your way to get anywhere. You can go somewhere directly. So we've got a very, what we call connected network.
That's great. Councillor Santos, is that, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. That was a very comprehensive response, and I do agree with you regarding the pathways. Now that you have brought up those points, really good points. It's better for people to be outside than buried underground. I agree. The only thing that I will request moving forward is if we could see renderings of what that winter atmosphere would look like, that would be super helpful, so that it signals to us that obviously folks are thinking about all the 4 seasons, even though you've just answered the questions and said that you are. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Singh.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation today. My first question just stems around sort of just the politics behind a highway. So, right now, obviously, this government and council, regional council as well, is enthusiastic about a highway. But if the wind changes or turns and and we've seen this in the past, there's cancellations and things are added back. If things, for example, are canceled for a highway, what is the contingency? Is it still to go with this boulevard cutting through, or not? Have we thought about that?
So it's a great question, Councillor Singh. So I think for a number of reasons, the economic development, the connections, but we've been talking about what form should that transportation infrastructure take that would be most beneficial to Brampton and to the communities. One of the things about this approach is that the funding for it doesn't require the province to be funding it directly, as it would the highway and the budget required for that. And it can be built incrementally. So having the parallel road structures, and there's an opportunity to kind of build towards it. So it can happen, I would say, and I think Ian and Andrew can maybe speak to that in a little more detail. But primarily, we're trying to make sure that the economic development and the sort of livability outcomes come together in the approach that's taken, but also that it provides some certainty. Because as you said, I mean, the highway question has been on again, off again, and it really has impacted the timing for the development of this community. So by putting a model forward that can be driven more by the market uptake and the opportunity for the city to play an active role rather than sort of waiting on the provincial decisions. Obviously, there's a discussion to follow in terms of what the province is aiming for right now, but we really do think that this model, for all sorts of reasons, achieves the provincial objectives better than the highway. Ian or Andrew, if you'd like to follow up.
Yeah, I'll add a couple comments before Ian gets into some more of the technical stuff. Some of the additional work we're doing right now, we've mentioned this previously to council. We have engaged Watson and Associates, who are looking at the economic impact of this plan. And one of the things they're doing is looking at highway versus urban boulevard. We're quite confident that the case isn't even going to be close, that the boulevard will outperform. And Ian walked you through that chart earlier that showed a lot of the things we're looking at. But specifically, we're going to be looking at quantifying dollars around tax base implications of going in this more, what we believe is a more sustainable direction. We're going to look to confirm some of the population and jobs numbers and have Watson provide some guidance that we will work with our economic development department on the jobs front. The reason we're doing that is when you talk to the province about things like highways, a lot of the rationale for kickstarting this highway again and reigniting the EA was to pursue job creation and residential development. We're going to be able to demonstrate quite clearly that this concept achieves those objectives, but it does it in a better way. So we want to put some numbers behind that we can share with the province. And as we mentioned earlier, it's very important that we start talking with our neighbors, Caledon, Halton Hills, et cetera, about this plan, because we have not done that to date. And we want to get direction from council to provide us direction to begin those conversations, to share this approach with them. We think they may be quite intrigued by this approach.
Yeah, my question more specifically, I guess if a highway doesn't materialize, then does the boulevard still make sense in the way it's currently designed, given that a highway wouldn't exist north of this or south of this? Like, have we considered that, and do we have backups, or do we still go with the boulevard, whether there's a highway or not?
I see. I understand your question now. So yes, we would still proceed with this boulevard in that orientation. even prior to the GTA West corridor, there had always been discussions about some form of higher order north-south transportation connection. So we think the boulevard would make sense, even if the highway is canceled outright. And quite likely, towns like Caledon and Vaughan would want to see this concept continue along in the corridor that the GTA West corridor was being planned within. So we think it would proceed irrespective of a highway being canceled.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was asking. And so I noticed you said we haven't talked to neighboring municipalities yet because we're waiting for council to endorse this. I heard earlier we haven't, but I wasn't clear. We have not approached the MPPs yet, or have we talked to the area MPPs?
Sorry. So what we have been focused on the stakeholders locally. So we haven't reached out to the MPPs or more broadly in any formal way. But the process we've been going through has also been fairly public. So it wouldn't be surprising if they're aware of this approach. What we really want to do is make sure that you were all familiar with this, and we had that endorsement from council. So we've got a firm platform to bring those discussions forward. And as we learn more, we'll bring that back in and refine the plan.
Okay. And my last question, it kind of builds on what Councillor Vicente was saying earlier about, more employment. And I understand that, mixed use might be a better way forward. But I think what he was getting at, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what I was also thought he was getting at was, the areas designated for single dwellings are still, in my opinion, still quite a bit. And so if we could, I know this is bold, but I'm gonna, because we're also looking at right smack in the middle. I saw earlier of having another GO train station potentially. I would be open, and other councillors can speak for themselves, to be even denser, whether it's more dense residential or mixed use, given that I understand the argument for having specifically employment zoned areas and how work is changing, and also we don't want warehousing and logistics in this area, and I'm totally good with that. That makes sense, given how we've sort of designed everything. But I still fundamentally believe we can go denser on the residential, and at the same time add more mixed use, so that the yellow areas are minimized, because Brampton is just, as you know, full of single dwelling units.
I think I take that under advisement. Certainly the forms in that lower density area can be a bit different. I think Ian has indicated that in the answer, so you can have a range of densities. One of the things we take very seriously here is the need to have a more attention to affordability and equity. I think throughout, given all of the things going on in the world, we need to make sure that it really does fit the population that is here and that we want to see accommodated. So that has to fit the style of housing that's actually going to work for people. So more work to be done there. And some of it is the market. But I think that range of densities does allow for a different form. But certainly take your point that at this point it's a concept, and we can continue to refine it. And thank you for that.
Actually, Bob, could I add just a couple of comments? The one thing I would want to emphasize to council is the framework that we've created here allows flexibility. So we can actually ratchet up or ratchet down densities quite nicely with the structure that we've created out in Heritage Heights. By creating a very connected road structure and by focusing the design around higher order transit, this community can handle a lot of density, unlike a lot of other areas within the city of Brampton. So it's well positioned for a lot of what we're hearing from members of council. We're going to be working with the Region Appeal, and I know there are Region Appeal staff listening in today. We've been working quite closely with them, both on the GTA West corridor, as well as the whole assumptions within this plan. One thing that we will be chatting with council with as part of the official plan is really the allocations that have been provided to Brampton for growth. This challenges the allocations that Brampton has been given in the past. So likely in the not too distant future, we're probably going to want to argue for a larger share of growth within Peel, because with plans like this, we can actually accommodate it quite well.
Yeah, and I think you'll find council, well, I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of council are supportive of that.
That's great. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Williams, I think you were next on the list.
Yes, thank you. Hi, good morning. Great presentation. It's good to see things really coming together for this area of Heritage Heights. So my thoughts and questions were around the Main Street area, thinking about how or the demographic that we're going to be attracting to this area. It seems very hip, you know, lots of energy, you know, active transportation, and what really will be the glue that's going to hold a lot of this together is entertainment. And so when you look at some of these streets, like the Main Street, I can't help but think about areas like Hess Village in Hamilton or even King West. And so what are some of the accommodations or thoughts that have gone into, you know, road closures or high volumes of people on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and the opportunity for the types of jobs that will encourage people to come out and be in these areas, rather than or especially when you're looking at that mixed youth type of environment. So what kind of accommodations have been looked into for that? And will this model really encourage this live, work, and play type of vibe? Because I think what really ruins many cities is, you know, if people come into work and then they leave, and there's just not much that's been you know, looked into around restaurants, entertainment, clubs, you know what I mean? Those type of things that get people out to really enjoy these types of areas.
Okay, that's no, thank you, and some really good points there. Yeah, I think one of the things to emphasize is some of the work is going to be coming later in terms of refining the exact components that are there. But as I think Andrew, Ian have mentioned earlier, this framework, the road network in particular, but how that relates to land use, really does provide for a lot of flexibility. So, for example, if you're going to be, you know, closing a road, if you want to, you know, turn that into an opportunity for a Friday night festival, something like that, you've got alternative travel paths. So very easily you can shift things around to support that. You know, at this point, we haven't looked at exactly what businesses and you know, this is a long range plan, but that concept that you're seeing in front of you does support the live work environment, is really intended to cultivate that kind of living arrangement and employment attraction, which is what we're seeing, you know, not just throughout the GTA, but throughout North America and beyond, as where the jobs are created and where people honestly want to be. You know, so we can incorporate that. All of those components, I think, go into what has to happen next when the plan comes forward. We've got, you know, the opportunity for these things to happen, but it's also making a strong presentation for attracting businesses and attracting development. But this really is the kind of place that we know a lot of investment is looking to come.
So Bob, can I add something to that?
By all means, Ian.
So yeah, Bob's exactly right. We haven't got into that level of detail, but we have made some structural moves to help encourage that kind of celebration space. And if you look at that red area with the white square in the middle, that's what Andrea pointed out as the Main Street area. And it's of a length which is probably 400 or 500 meters long, which is a really nice scale for a Main Street. It's two-sided. It's on Fan Drive, and we picked Fan Drive on purpose because it's well located right next to the wellness district and also to a lot of jobs. And notice it's on the kind of the Brampton side of the boulevard, so that folks from the east can access it as well. It has, if you could point out the fire station at Sandalwood Parkway, notice the fire station is not on Fan Drive, and that was on purpose. And the access to the emergency services and so forth in the medical area, the wellness area, won't be using Fan Drive. And Fan Drive will probably be what we call a flush street or curbless street, so that when it's closed to motorists for special events, that folks in wheelchairs with other mobility impairments can use that main square and use the street as basically a plaza without having to go to the end of the street to find a ramp. So that space can be turned into an event space, Friday nights, weekends, for any sort of event at practically any scale, because all the 4 streets around that little square will be flush and won't have, through the structure of the planning, and not be encumbered by, emergency services needs and other sorts of needs. And it has a great address on the boulevard, so folks going up and down the boulevard will know that, hey, there's the main street. And as soon as you get on it, it will be of a completely different scale, highly slow street with uncompromisingly about social and economic exchange, and not about throughput. There won't be any turn lanes on that street, for example, to keep it very focused on people shopping, lots of natural surveillance by windows and so forth. So we haven't gone into that detail, but we've set it up through the structure so that kind of thing can occur.
And that's good to hear. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Did somebody want to comment?
Oh, I was just going to add a couple points that I think you're right on with a lot of your comments. It's critically important that we create that inclusive, walkable, cool place within this plan. That's really absent in the 905 today, and that's why so many 905 communities, we're losing our young to places like Toronto, because they want to be able to live, work, learn, and play without having to own a car. That's very different from a lot of our generation and older generations. So this is a place in Brampton where we can do it right. And that will attract people right on the GO line that connects Union Station to Waterloo. But it's an uncompromisingly urban place that is highly walkable for all ages and all demographics. And that's an economic development tool. Creating great places is a job attractor. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here.
And that's really good to hear, because I want to make sure that we are fully incorporating this concept in this development, because when you have such an area that is so upscale, looks really inviting, and it's a real cool hip place to be in a good expansive area as well. Because if you look at King West in Toronto, it's a large street that in order to accommodate some of the patio areas, they've taken away a lane and it's really made that area such a vibrant place to be on a Friday or Saturday night. And like it attracts 905ers, and so with the Heritage Heights, if it has infrastructure set up to really encourage this type of vibe, then you're going to have people coming from Orangeville, coming from Georgetown to this area. And so we want to make sure that we have the space to accommodate people coming from areas outside of Brampton, to the north and the east and the west, to make sure we have that space to accommodate everyone. So I really like the idea of an open area, or like a square. However, it is that vibe of, walking down the street and being able to check out different places and go to different bars, or, have different experiences, I think is something we really need to consider. And maybe that is more of a direction that we want to go to on an economic development standpoint than a large open square area that sometimes may not be used, or you may have rental issues and so on and so forth. So I think that this is in a great direction. And then also, to echo Councillor Singh's points, being able to scale up, I think, is going to be extremely important for this area, just to make sure that we are attracting talent and people that are just excited to be close to all of the transit, but then be in an area that's kind of close to your parents as well. So I'm looking forward to things moving forward, but I do want to make sure that we are considering those livability pieces to make sure the infrastructure is there at the time, so that we're not backtracking, right? But it's great. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Bowman?
Thank you very much. Good work, good job. I enjoyed all the illustrations. Just to make it very short and sweet, I agree with Councillor Williams' assessment. It looks like a great place. People are going to want to be there, especially young people, which leads me to an observation that perhaps once a hospital is designated to this location, that the next viable thing should be a university, possibly with with medical students or something like that. If this is going to be an upscale place where all the younger generation want to be, it might make sense. So perhaps at some point we should be looking at the future plans on what we plan and where we plan for the universities. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowman. I think, as we said, I mean, there's flexibility in the plan, and I know, right now the focus will be on the downtown campus for the university, but absolutely in the future, how we sort of work with those other uses to integrate them into the form, is a huge asset with this kind of approach. But thank you, Councillor Leshy.
Thanks, Bob. So I just wanted to make a couple comments from seeing this last time to now. I like the area of the hospital that we're talking about now a lot better than what we were talking about before, with it being close to Lagerfield and Mississauga Road. I think this gives more opportunity. That being said, I hope that if we don't get the buy-in from the province and they end up sticking the 4-lane down our throat, then that reverts back to the BOULEVARD and Mississauga Road area. Just to Councillor Singh's comment about the MPPs, I have talked to the MPPs in the area, and they're very supportive of this concept, which is good. There was an earlier comment about truck traffic on Mayfield Road, and truck traffic on Mayfield is virtually non-existent in this area, as opposed to anything east of the 410, and then it diminishes going west, of course, at the 410, again at Highway 10, and then again at Chinguacousy and Mississauga Road. I guess this is a tough area. If I was a business owner, we were talking about putting a business in the northwest corner, the farthest area of Brampton, right adjacent to the Greenbelt and a municipality, two municipalities essentially that don't have room to grow in that area. So I think that's difficult, and I think we need to strike some kind of balance to see what kind of business we can put there or will be supported there. So I worry about that. I also just wanted to, I guess, put an emphasis on the fact that we want to ensure that all land use and categories, permitted land uses and densities, are flexible to accommodate all the market needs. I think the message that I want to get out with landowners and business owners to build what can be marketed in balance with the city's achieving walkable, pedestrian-friendly, and energy-efficient communities. I don't know if staff have comments.
Great, Councillor. I think one of the things we haven't talked about as much, but I think you've seen evidence of it in the approach we've been taking, is it's a little different than some earlier planning processes. So the intent here is really to get this done quickly, make sure we've got the high-level principles in place, but ultimately we want to make sure that that flexibility is in place to respond to the market, so that it's as light regulatory touch as possible, and that we've got the guidance to the framework there to really pursue those opportunities and get people's businesses into the ground as far as possible and help people's projects come to fruition. So that's really the intent, and I mean, that's also going to be the approach with the new official plan, is to really make sure we've got a framework that's a little more strategic and reflects the kind of business approach we want to take. So all of that is part of the background work that we're going to be doing, is making sure that that's in the regulations and the policy work that comes forward. So that's a great approach. In terms of that flexibility, in terms of employment uses, absolutely, there's ways to sort of respond as we kind of look at what the interests are from different property owners. And we just know that the mixed use is probably where we're going to see the most uptake from a business development standpoint, but absolutely sensitive to the other components as they come forward. I don't know if there's anything else others would like to offer.
Yeah, I would just add, Bob, in addition to flexibility, one of the key things that I think the entire development community will appreciate is clarity. Having a clear plan, being very clear about what you're trying to achieve, and being able to process applications quickly because you have that clarity. Time is money in the development community, and I think that's a positive for the development community. But we absolutely are on the same page. As we move forward, following hopefully the council endorsement in a few weeks, our intention would be to work with landowners and the community to create the planning regime, the policy regime that would implement this concept, and it has to have some flexibility to it. Now, the art of this is being flexible enough to respond to the market, but also being clear enough to get what you want. And the area, particularly red as an example, where we have a main street, we're probably going to want to be quite clear. I don't want to call it rigid, but a little more clear than in some other areas of the plan, just to ensure that we get that cool main street that we're looking for. Because so often those types of places never really materialize the way they had been envisioned. So we'll have to strike that balance between providing enough direction and enough flexibility. And that's what will be the collaborative process moving forward to try and get that right balance.
No, and thank you for that. And that's my worry about kind of this whole initiative is that, what we want, what Councillor Williams was talking about is, I spent some time in Spain where they have this very similar current concept, and what we're looking at there that works fantastic, and that's essentially what I think all members of council want to see. Although we do have some challenges, and the challenge of convincing the province that this is the best way forward. And I think we're in a better situation today with probably the lack of funding that the province has to invest in any highways, and us showing them that this is something that can work and strike that balance. And then we have a third hospital that challenge that we want to ensure that the community in the northwest end of Brampton and all of Brampton essentially are taken care of with a much needed third hospital, and not let alone we also need the phase 2 of Peel Memorial as well. So and then we have 2 other municipalities, 3 other essentially that we have to convince that they start thinking a little bit differently. I think they're all or 2 out of the 3 are at least supportive of a highway concept. So not seeing this yet. So we have that. But now we have something else. We're talking about numbers that we don't have. And with everything that's going on at the Region Appeal, and regional councillors will see the fact that, we're arguing over numbers now for other municipalities. And Brampton is essentially going back to, the 7-year-old ROPA that's 43,000 people, 20,000 jobs, and asking for a lot more. So that is maybe one of our biggest hills to climb, and I'm not sure how we get around that. And I was surprised to see the numbers that are there. They're really they're not really realistic numbers when we have numbers that were provided, and now we're looking at something that's a lot different. And I don't know if there's an appetite. I'm in it for Brampton, and we'll fight the fight. But we've seen that at regional council what kind of the issues that are evolving with when we're talking about numbers.
Yeah, and on that point, Councillor Palesci, we've already initiated some discussions with regional staff about that issue. And one of the key things that we're talking about is there's a difference between allocation and ultimate build-out potential of a community. So as long as the region would be comfortable allowing a place to be planned for a significantly higher build-out, ultimate build-out potential, we can work with the allocations, and the development can be staged over time. The good news is with the recent announcement of the lengthened planning horizon to 2051, I think we have an opportunity to have that discussion, because it's not just for Heritage Heights, it's also for the downtown, uptown, Queen Street. So a larger ultimate build-out population for Brampton is something that we need to be chatting about through the official plan, in addition to this exercise.
Yeah, Andrew's exactly right. That conversation is one that needs to happen for all of Brampton, and it needs to be realistic. Brampton is growing very quickly. It's a very attractive community. I'm not so sure that the allocations reflect the actual experience of development in Brampton. So we have to make sure that what's in there is a little more calibrated to what Brampton's seeing in terms of uptake. Councillor Palesci, any follow-up comments?
No, I think that was about it. Some challenges to go, but I like to go forward and look forward to seeing the report come to council.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Some good comments. Councillor Dillon, I see you done for a question here.
Sorry, I don't have a question.
Okay, good. Thank you. Hope I haven't missed anybody, or is there anyone else who's got a question they'd like to ask councillors? Okay, well, hearing none, thank you very much. It's been, am I getting a response there? Okay, I was just going to say thank you. I think the team and the stakeholders have been involved have really helped refine this plan to get it to this point, and we really appreciate the time you've taken to engage and give us some feedback and an opportunity to answer your questions. It's a really exciting stage, and it really is one of those key components for us to advance the vision and that approach that we really need to see for Brampton to become successful in taking that vision, making it real. So I think we've got obviously more work to do, but we're really pleased with what's come together here, and we're happy to hear that we've got your support, and we'll bring the report forward in short order and that formal consideration. So thank you again, and in the interim, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Andrew, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation there. So thanks very much to everyone, and have a great day.